For today's session, we are going to check why mutual exclusion is essential. Okay, what are the ways to implement distributed mutual exclusion in distributed systems? And to get the implementation, you need to know some of the algorithms which are very much helpful for electing the coordinator. So some of the election algorithms also we are going to check. So basically, we were working on time synchronization. Under that, we had seen clock synchronization, logical clock synchronization, and vector clock how to use. Okay, now we will see something on mutual exclusion and election algorithms. So, which will complete this particular chapter on distributed clock, sorry, the logical clock and related concepts. So it is often necessary to protect a shared resource within a distributed system using mutual exclusion. That means it might be necessary to ensure that no other process changes the shared resource while another process is working with it, basically to maintain the consistency, which is very important in case of distributed systems. So in non-distributed systems, that is uniprocessor systems, you have seen some concepts on critical regions or critical section, and using some of the techniques like semaphores, counting semaphores, monitors, clocks, all those mechanisms you have already seen, and the constructs will give the mutual exclusion, which is possible in case of uniprocessor systems. So these techniques have been adapted in the distributed systems because each system has got its own operating system, processor, and memory. But if you are working on a distributed nature, how are you going to achieve it? So that is what we are going to see. Basically, that need of the distributed, that is mutual exclusion, that is very important to protect the shared resource and to achieve consistency in the transactions or any kind of process execution. So distributed process need to coordinate to access shared resources. For example, writing a file in a distributed file system. So for example, you have a server where you have to write a file apc.txt, which is shared between many processes. This kind of thing you are able to see in case of GitHub repositories. When you are working on a project, you must have used such kind of concept. So read from a file, okay, whichever is being shared between many users, that is possible. At the same time, write to a file. So you have seen this readers writers problem, how you can manage it, how you are going to compose readers and writers in case of operating system as a service which is being given. So in case of distributed systems, reading and writing, similarly, writing of a particular file and at the same time, some other client also wants to write or to modify that particular file. So this should happen, but it should maintain the consistency. So how to make it possible? That is what we are going to check. So this scenario you have already seen, and then you must have seen the consistency maintenance in the cloud systems. So cloud basically is a sub part of distributed system, or you can say actual application of distributed system concepts. In uniprocessor systems, mutual exclusion to shared resources provided through shared variable, or as I said, using semaphores or monitors or a lock, you will be able to utilize that particular concept. But in case of distributed system, it is only such kind of support is insufficient. So you need to have a particular mechanism which has to be uh, included in the system so that there will not be any problem. So we'll see some of the things which you can do in the distributed systems. So how to make various processes coordinate to access the shared resource simply by passing the message and enforce distributed mutual exclusion. So this can be done in two different ways based on various algorithms which are used to do that. So it can be classified into two categories. The first one is the permission-based approach. The second one is token-based approach. So in case of a permission-based approach, a process which wants to access a shared resource requests the permission from one or more coordinators. So in this particular case, for example, it requests the access to uh, get the access to the shared resource, but that request will be sent to first coordinator, and then you will be able to see that if no other client is asking for the same resource, then coordinator will grant the access to that particular resource. So that accessing the shared resource will happen like this through the coordinator. So this in case of token based, each shared resource has a token. So it is circulated among all the processes. A process can access the resource if it has the token. So for example, you have a server where you want to uh, have the access to the resource which is being shared between many clients. So under the access giving mechanism, each client or each process will get the access only if it has a token. So when it is circulated, you will be able to get a token, then only you will be able to get a access. Similar to this. So P2 will get a token and then it will access. And then P3 will get a token and it will be able to access. So these are the basic two categories of algorithms or approaches through which you are going to achieve the mutual exclusion. So we'll see some of the advantages and some of the drawbacks and which are the scenarios you can protect and how to achieve the consistency in the various process execution and transaction. So we'll see one by one. So in case of permission-based approaches, there are two types of permission-based mutual exclusion algorithm. One is the centralized way, as just example I had shown it to you. The other one is decentralized algorithms. So we'll see centralized algorithm how it is made. So one process is elected as a coordinator for a shared resource. So in this particular scenario, you have three different processes and one resource. So one of the processes will be elected as a coordinator. So to elect one of the processes as coordinator, you need to have a election algorithm that we are going to see later. So coordinator maintains a queue of access requests. So because it has to give one after the other to that particular shared resource. So whenever a process wants to access the resource, it sends a request message to the coordinator to access the resource as shown in the simulation. So when the coordinator receives the request, if no other process is currently accessing that resource, it grants the permission to the resource by sending a grant message. If there are no more requests to that particular resource at that particular instance, it will grant the access to that particular resource. Okay, so resource will be accessed. At the same time, if P2 or P0 wants to access the same resource, in that particular case, that request, because since P1 is already accessing the resource, coordinator will queue that particular request and till the access by P1 is released, coordinator will not give the access to process P2 to access that resource which is shared. So if another process is accessing the resource, the coordinator queues the request and does not reply to the request. So in that case, it is going to queue. As many processes they are requesting for that shared resource, those will be queued one after the other. So the process releases the exclusive access after accessing the resource. So once P1's need is over and it finishes its execution with that shared resource, it will release that resource. So once it is sending the message release to the coordinator, after that the coordinator will actually get the process which is in the queue, and it will grant the access to that particular process. So the coordinator will then send the grant message to the next process in the queue. So this is how the centralized algorithm will work. So this is a simple one. There are a good number of advantages where you will be able to get the consistency. Along with that, it's simple to implement. But there is one drawback. What is that drawback? Can anyone identify? With permission-based approach, you are working on centralized algorithm. So choosing one of the process as coordinator, and all the requests will go via the coordinator, and coordinator will control the access to the shared resource for all the processes who are requesting in the distributed system. So here you are going to get the mutual exclusion. That means one after the other only the processes will be able to get the access to that particular resource. This is the advantage, and you are able to synchronize and coordinate with the processes, as many processes you have in the system. But in this particular mechanism, you have one main drawback. What is it? Can anyone identify? So in case of centralized algorithm, the coordinator can block the requesting process until the resource is free. So that is how the mutual exclusion pattern has been achieved. Otherwise, the coordinator can send a permission denied message back to the process. Then the process can poll the coordinator at a later time. Or in the second scenario, generally the coordinator queues the request. Once the resource is released from the process which it was accessing, the coordinator will send an explicit grant message to that particular process for the second process, and then the things will continue. So then, what are the uh, advantages? So it guarantees mutual exclusion, and it is simple to implement. So in case of such kind of centralized algorithm, it is vulnerable to a single point of failure. So this is the drawback or the limitation. And the second thing is processors cannot distinguish between dead coordinator and request blocking. So whether coordinator is dead, that means why it is not responding. Whenever you put a request, many times you must have seen you have put a query on the browser, so the page is not responding. So in that case, what do you think, whether it is dead coordinator or it is request blocking? So to get such kind of problem solved, in case of centralized algorithm, it is difficult because you will not be able to identify whether the coordinator is dead, or it is not responding, or it has crashed, or it is basically not responding by blocking the other processes to give the access. So if you consider the fault tolerant nature, that is the safety point of uh, the system. In this particular case, along with the advantages, you will not be able to get the uh, advantage in the sense that if coordinator crashes, there's a problem. And second thing is, if it is not responding, the clients will not be able to, or processes will not be able to identify whether the coordinator has crashed or it is because of request block. So there is a performance bottleneck. In large systems, single coordinator can be overwhelmed with the request. So this is with respect to the performance degradation. So it is good for finite number of systems, and if the number is comparatively uh, less, the number of systems who are interacting in the system, if the number is less, this will work fine. So any doubts till now? I hope this is very simple to understand and to illustrate. Okay. To avoid the drawbacks of centralized algorithm, Lin et al. Advocated a decentralized mutual exclusion algorithm. So this is the second category. So the assumptions made under this is distributed processes are in a distributed hash table based system. So each resource is replicated n times because in the centralized system there is a single point of failure. So here you will be replicating that resource n times. The ith replica of a resource R name is named as R name of I. That means R name 1, R name 2, R name 3 like that to identify the replica of that particular resource. So every replica has its own coordinator for controlling the access. So here instead of having only one coordinator, you will be having many coordinators. So the coordinator for R name I is determined by using a hash function. So who will be the coordinator for the resource R name 1 or R name 2? This will be decided by using a hash function. So what is the approach? Then how are you going to decide when the access will be granted or not by that particular coordinator which has been chosen? So that is based on a condition. Whenever a process wants to access the resource, it will have to get a majority vote from m greater than n by 2 coordinators. I'll show you one example so that you will be able to understand what it is. So if a coordinator does not want to vote a process because it is already voted to some other process, or in that particular case, it will send a permission denied message to the process. So you will have to see how many number of processes you have, how many number of coordinators you have. So the coordinators, this processor should be able to get the access only when the coordinator's vote is greater than number of processes divided by 2. So this is the condition. If it is achieved, then the process will get access to that particular resource. So as a animation, we'll see if n is equal to 10. That means there are 10 different resources, and there are actually at least 7 votes to access to that particular resource. So if you can see in this particular example, P0, every process will actually uh, put a counter to find out the vote. So how many coordinators they are going to get, and then out of that, how many of them are getting access, that is giving the vote for giving the access to that particular process. So for example, P0 request for C1. Okay, so in that case, this is the coordinator for that particular resource, that is R name 1. So in this particular case, a coordinator replies, suppose, okay, that means it is giving the vote as 1. Then it will be able to, that voting count will be getting it increased by 1. So it will again request to the second coordinator. So if it gives okay, then the counter will be getting incremented to 2. Like that, it should be able to collect at least 7 votes. So it is asking for C5 because these are the various coordinators which are actually giving the vote as yes. So incremented by 5, 6, 7. So when it is able to get the count as 7, that means it will be able to access the resource uh, which it has requested. So P naught will get a access to R name 1. So this is how the system will work. For example, in case of P1, again it requests for a particular resource. So in this particular case, it is asking the resource number 4. So it says that okay. So in that case, it will be able to get the count as 1. So then it will ask for the other coordinators. So second, it will say yes. So counter becomes 2. Now for the third one, that is C9, which is requested, it is giving D9. Then again it is asking for 7. So it is again saying that it is D9. So 8, it is showing it as Okay, but here what happens is it is not able to get the count equal to greater than or equal to 7. So it is not able to get the access to that particular resource which it has requested as R name, that is resource name 4. So in this particular case, the red arrows where it is showing the access is denied and total number of votes which it has counted as only 3, P1 will not get the access to that particular resource which it has requested. So in this decentralized algorithm, the coordinators are as many based on the distributed hash function, and you will be able to get multiple replicas of the resources, and this is how the coordination will be taking place by sending the message and receiving the access to that particular resource. So I hope the scenario is clear and the example is clear. Yes, one of you respond. This is regarding the decentralized algorithm as an example. So if the illustration is asked, how are you going to work on decentralized algorithm in case of mutual exclusion in distributed systems? You can interpret in this particular way, or you can illustrate in your own way how you have understood. I hope this particular example is clear to you. Yes, one of you respond. Say, I'm sending you the
Yes.
message. Yeah, so at least you will have to respond. If many of you are responding, that means the concept is clear, right? Yes, shall I continue?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, good. So, in case of decentralized algorithm, how are you checking the fault tolerant nature? Because finally, you will have to get the system dependable. So, the decentralized algorithm assumes that the coordinator recovers quickly from a failure, so that there will not be any problem. Because here, if the coordinator fails, then either it has to recover from that particular failure quickly, because you have seen in the failure model there are some kind of arbitrary failures which will happen. If you ignore it for some time, it will be able to recover it from that particular stage, and if the delay is very less, you will not be able to get that experience that it has crashed or it is not giving the response. So, however, the coordinator would have set its state after the recovery. This is one problem where after recovery it must have reset its state to the original when it has started. So, in that case, what will be the problem? See, the assumption in case of decentralized algorithm is the coordinator will recover it fast. So if the delay is very less, the recovery time is very less, then you will not be able to see the impact of that particular failure. But there is a possibility that the coordinator will reset its state. So in that case, what will happen to the system? What can be the inconsistency while checking the condition? Because you have to get m is greater than or equal to n by 2, right? So in that particular case, what is the possibility, or what will be the limitation, or what will be the impact of this resetting the state back? Anyone? You have seen such kind of scenarios. Have you heard about stateless servers and stateful servers?
Stateless servers can recover after a crash.
Mm. Grateful. So in between, if it is resetting the state, what will happen? There is a inconsistency in counting of votes, right? If it is back to zero or back to one, already, for example, when that failure occurred and it has recovered from that particular failure and it has reset the state. So if it is very minimal, you will not be able to get any impact. But if it is moderately large amount of delay. So in that case, what will happen is maybe I think in the system it is already counted 3 or 4 mm, votes, but now when it resets, it is coming back to zero. So all the three votes which have been counted, okay, either those will be lost and the process will not be able to access the uh, resource because of it has not met the condition, or in the second state if it has taken the same state, that means if it is maintaining the state information, so in that case it has already counted 3. So there is a possibility that after it has recovered, it will be able to get the required number of votes and then it will be able to get the access. So there is a possibility that if there is a loss of vote, or it is the same vote has been considered twice, so such kind of problems may arise if the uh, coordinator is not recovering quickly. So coordinator could have forgotten any vote it had given earlier. So this is one problem. So hence the coordinator may incorrectly grant permission to the processes. So these are the 2 points which you have to consider when you are working on decentralized algorithm. So mutual exclusion cannot be deterministically guaranteed. So you are not able to say that it is deterministically guaranteed, but algorithm probabilistically guarantees the mutual exclusion. So in this particular case, you have seen the predicates, that is possibly and definitely. So in which predicate it will happen, probabilistically it will be able to get the mutual exclusion. So if the probability of failure is very low, okay, so in that case, the system is fault tolerant and the recovery time, if it is very less, you will be able to get the mutual exclusion. So in this particular case, you will be able to get possibly predicate, and you will be able to get some kind of safety nature in the system. So probabilistic algorithms do not guarantee mutual exclusion, which is correctly enforced. Many other algorithms do, including the following. So originally proposed by Lampert based on his logical clocks and total ordering relation, which later has been modified by Ricard and Agarwala. We will see how actually you can make it work so that the mutual exclusion is enforced and it will be guaranteed. So you will be able to get the definitely predicate there. So in this particular algorithm, there are 2 types of messages considered. The first one, request access to the shared resource, which has been sent to all the processes in the group. That is basically you are working on multicast. So there is one more type of message which is used, that is reply or okay. A message eventually received at the request site SI from all other sites. So even if it is delayed for some time, you will be able to get a reply or okay message from all other sites. So messages are timestamped based on the Lampers total ordering relation with logical clock, that timestamp and the process ID which will be mentioned. So to provide an unambiguous order to all of the relevant events which are happening in various processes. So these are the 2 types of messages which are sent between various processes, and Lampert's logical ordering, that to total ordering has been taken care, and you will be able to timestamp that particular sending event and receiving event by logical clock timestamp along with the process ID, because you are following the total ordering. So when a process PI wants to access a shared resource, it builds a message with the resource name, PID, and current timestamp. So request will be in this particular form. You will have a request message with the resource name and the timestamp at that particular instance, and then the process ID. So a request sent from P3 at time 4 would be timestamped as 4.3. So 4 means the timestamp is that particular instance is 4, and the request is being sent from process P3. Send the message to all other process including itself. So it will send all the this request message will be sent to all the process, because you have to get a mutual exclusion, and you are going to check whether any process is in its critical section. I hope all of you know what do you mean by critical section. Here you are going to check only one process will be in its critical section. Then only this mutual exclusion will happen, and you are going to get the access to that particular resource till you are in critical section. That is, any process which is in its critical section will have the access to that shared resource, and that till that time all other processes who wants to get the same shared resource, they will have to wait. So in this particular case, one assumption is very important, that is message passing is reliable. So there is no loss of messages, or there is no failure. That is what we are going to take it as a assumption. Otherwise, including that, it becomes very complex. So for this particular kind of algorithm, the main assumption made is message passing is reliable. So PI sends a request to all the sites. When PK receives that particular request, it acts based on its own status relative to the critical section. So I hope all of you know what do you mean by a critical section. Can anyone answer to this particular question? Yes, anyone? So basically it is
It's
yeah. Yes, tell me.
it's a segment where the shared variables can be used. Like only one process will be able to use that section at one time.
Yeah, that is correct. So critical section is a code snippet or a segment of the code where it is used whenever you are accessing a shared resource. Okay, so it has to execute that particular code, then only you will be able to get the access to that particular resource. So that is where you are going to use the shared variable. That is correct. So when PK, that is the second process or the third process, whichever the kth process receives that request, since it has PI has broadcasted the request to all the sites to get access to a shared resource. So it should be able to get OK message from all the processes, then only it will be able to enter into its critical section. That means it is able to access that particular resource. So when PK receives this particular request, how actually it will be acting upon it. So it sends a reply OK if it is not in its critical section and doesn't want the critical section at all. That means PK is not accessing that shared resource which has been requested by PI, and it doesn't want to take that resource for that particular instance. So it will send the reply OK. So it doesn't need that uh, shared resource. So this is the first scenario. Uh, Otherwise, it queues the request locally if it is in its critical section, but does not reply. So if PK, it is in its critical section, because if it has the access to that particular resource already has access to that particular shared resource, which PI is requesting for. What it will do is it will queue that particular uh, request locally, but it won't reply to the process PI. So if it isn't in the critical section, but would like to be, that is, this is the third scenario. First scenario is it is not there in the critical section and it doesn't want to go for critical section. It don't want to get that particular shared resource and then use it in its execution. Second is it is already using that resource. At the same time, some other process is asking for it. What it will do is it will queue that particular request. Third case, if it is not in the critical section, but it wants to go into the critical section. That means it want to get the access to that particular critical section. Then sends a reply okay if the incoming request has a lower timestamp than its own. That means the PI process has requested earlier to the PK process. Then it will send a reply to PI process saying that okay, because it needs in the second time, because already the timestamp on the PI process is less than the timestamp on the PK process. So otherwise queues that particular request and does not reply. So these are the three things which will happen in the receiving end. So in this case, the incoming request has lower priority than the PK's request priority. So if it is getting queued up, means it is the timestamp on PK will be less compared to the PI process. That means PI has requested later and PK has requested first. So based on these three scenarios, the OK message will be sent or it is not sent. Only the request is been queued up. PI can enter its critical section when it has received an OK reply from every other process. For example, in the system, you have 5 processes and first process, that is P1, has requested for getting the access to a particular shared resource. Then you should be able to send the request to all the remaining 4 processes and itself. If it is able to get the reply as okay from other 4 remaining processes, then only it will be able to get the access to that particular resource. So no undelivered higher priority request can exist. It would have arrived before the OK reply. So that is what is been taken care if it has to access the resource in the system, that is which is being shared between many processes. So it will consider only when if it is able to receive the OK reply from all other remaining processes. Then only it will be able to enter into its critical section. That means it is able to access the shared resource. For example, in this particular slide, you have P1, P2, P3 and the timestamps and the process ID has been mentioned and the event that is the request which is sent from P1 and P2 has been notified. So process P2 can enter the critical section. Why? See, in this particular case, P1 has also requested and P2 has requested. So when you compare the timestamp on P1 and P2, okay, so in this particular case, P2 has smaller timestamp than P1. So P1 will reply OK. Similarly, in case of P3, P3 has not requested for the shared resource. So it will reply OK. So in that particular case, P2 will be able to get the messages OK from both P1 as well as P3. So it will be able to access the shared resource. That means in this particular state, since it is able to receive the reply message as OK from P1 as well as from P3, P2 will enter into its critical section and it will be able to execute the critical section. That means it is able to get the access to the shared resource. So P2 did not reply to P1 because P1's request has a larger timestamp. Okay, so that is why it has not replied. But once the P2's critical section or the accessing that shared resource is over, it will be able to release that particular resource by sending the release message back to the P1. So in that particular case, that is why in P1 this is being queued up. So when P2 releases its critical section and hence the shared resource, now P1 will be able to get the release message from P2 as well as P3 will be sending already the reply message as OK to P1. Now P1 also can go into its critical section to get that access to the shared resource. So how to release the critical section? So when a processor completes its CS, that is critical section, in the previous case, the P2 process, it send a release message to all other processes. The release message acts as a OK reply to any other process which is waiting. So it requests is removed from all the queues at this particular time because P2 has finished its critical section and hence the access to that resource is completed. So if other processes are in a waiting queue to execute critical section or to access that particular shared resource, one of them will now be able to proceed. So in this particular case, now P2 has completed its critical section execution and it has given the release message to P1 showing that its request for the shared resource is over. From P3, it is already given the OK reply to P1. Now P1 can go into its critical section and hence the shared resource can be accessed. So like this, as many number of processes they are requesting for shared resource that can be coordinated one after the other. So mutually exclusive manner. So till one process is in its critical section, accessing the resource till it completes its execution, no other processes will get the access to that particular shared resource. So that is how mutual exclusion has been possible. So purpose of reply from node I to J ensures that J has seen all the requests from I prior to sending the reply, and therefore possibly any request of I with timestamp lower than J's request. So here it requires FIFO channels because the requests are queued up into n-1 messages per critical section. So you will be able to get this particular concept why you need to have to into n-1 messages per critical section. Okay, check it whether it is true or not. Synchronization delay will be equal to 1 message transmission time. So all of you know round trip time and all. Last class you have seen what is a round trip time, right? So 1 message transmission time. So when the message has sent from a particular process, it has to be received in the receiver. So that transmission, the time at which it has sent and then the time at which it is received, that is collected, and that is what actually the transmission time. If you want to get an average, you have to get the average of all these timings. So requests are granted in order of increasing timestamps. So this is something on permission-based approach where we have seen two kinds of algorithms. First one is centralized one and second one is decentralized one. With the centralized ones drawbacks, to remove those, we had seen decentralized. In that, the limitations were there. Just to avoid some limitations, you have seen the modification of the decentralized algorithm. And how are you going to achieve the mutual exclusion in distributed systems using Likata Agarwala? Like that, there are many more algorithms, but we have taken up only one as an example. Again, there are some limitations of Ricarta Agarwala, what you have seen just now. You can point out those which again have been solved in Makawa, but I will stop that particular concept where you are going to extend concepts of mutual exclusion, which you can make it work, avoiding the limitations in the Ricarta Agarwala. So if you need, you can go ahead with the concepts given in the book. You can just have a look how it is removed, and then what new concept or new logic you can put in, and then avoid those limitations. If you have your own ideas, also you can think about. So we'll move on to the next one, that is token based. So whether the things are clear till here, whatever we have covered. I'll move on to the token based approach. So in the token ring algorithm, each resource is associated with the token. The token is circulated among the process, and the process with the token can access the resource. So this is what is the basic concept. So circulating the token among the process, how it is to be done. So all processes form a logical ring where each process knows its next process. One process is given a token to access the resource. The process with the token has a right to access the resource. If the process has finished accessing the resource or does not want to access the resource, it passes the token to the next process in the ring. For example, in this particular case, at this moment, P1 has a token. So if it needs to get the access to the shared resource, it will get the access to that particular resource because P1 has the token. If it finish accessing that particular resource or it doesn't want to access the resource, so then it will pass that particular token to the next process in the logical ring. So like this particular token will be circulated in the logical ring, which is maintained because you will not be able to work upon physically. It is made logically by using the logical clock ordering. So token ring approach provides deterministic mutual exclusion. There is one token and the resource cannot be accessed without that particular token. So it avoids starvation. Each process will receive the token. So in the previous case, you must have observed that there is a possibility that there is a starvation. That means a process will never get a chance, or the delay will be so large that it has to be in the queue. So in this case, this will not happen because each process will receive the token. But what are the basic disadvantages or limitations? It has a high message overhead because when no process need the resource also, the token will be circulated. And in this particular case, if the token is lost, it has to be regenerated. That means it has to be recreated. In this particular case, detecting the token is loss of token is very difficult, and the time between the successive appearance of token is unbounded. uh, Dead processes must be purged from the ring. So again, acknowledge based token delivery has to be included so that purging dead processes will be taken care. So these are the limitations under the token ring aspect. Is it clear? So this is again a simple concept. Only you will have to visualize where the advantage is more or where the drawback is less. So to have a comparison for centralized, decentralized, and token ring, delay before a process can access the resource, which will be measured in message times. So number of processes, messages required for a process to access and release the shared resource. and the limitations or the problems occurring due to that particular algorithm. So this is being compiled. So in the first case, centralized delay before process can access the resources to number of processes required for a process to access and release the shared resource is 3. Number of messages which are required for the centralized algorithm, because you have to get a request, then you have to get a grant, and then you have to release. So there are 3. So problem is coordinator crash. So if coordinator crashes, whole thing will be getting stopped, or the recovery, if the coordinator's recovery is again time, recovery time also is large. In that case, it will not be able to identify. So in case of decentralized, 2 MKM is basically the minimum number of coordinators who have to agree for a process to access a resource. K is average number of requests made by the process to a coordinator to request for a vote. So this much of delay, the number of messages which are required will be 2MK plus M, where K will be equal to 1, 2, 3 till as many number of resources which you have. That is the number of requests which have been made by the process to the coordinator. And here a large number of messages are seen. In case of token ring, it is 0 to n minus 1. And in case of number of messages, it will be 1 to infinity, because it is based on the number of processes and the token as many number of times it has circulated. The token may be lost, a ring can cease to exist since processes crash. So to identify which process has crashed and then how to get the next process which is active and which is live to get the token. So that is important. So these are the general comparison for various algorithms which you have seen in case of permission based and token based. So any doubts or the concepts are okay? If they are okay, then I'll go to election algorithms, because this is again required while electing the coordinator, right? How are you going to elect the coordinator? And if coordinator or the process which is controlling the whole mutual exclusion, if it crashes, how to identify and how to elect the new coordinator. So these are the two things which have to be considered in the election algorithm. So many distributed algorithms require one process to act as a coordinator. Typically, it does not matter which process is elected as a coordinator, but this algorithms require one process to act as a coordinator. So where election algorithms are required, you have seen this. In case of mutual exclusion, there's one scenario where you need to elect a coordinator. The second one is in the time server. You have seen Berkeley clock synchronization algorithm. So here again, that time server has to be elected. So in such kind of scenarios, you need to elect a coordinator, and then the process should execute in a mutually exclusive way. Okay. So to work on this, we'll see two kinds of election algorithms. Okay, so in the election process, any process PI in the distributed system can initiate the election algorithm that elects a new coordinator. At the termination of election algorithm, the elected coordinator process should be unique. Elected coordinator process should be unique. So there should not be any ambiguity which will be the coordinator. Every process may know the process ID of every other processes, but it does not know which process have crashed. So this is one problem where in case of election algorithms, you will be able to identify which process has crashed and then who will be the next coordinator. So generally we require that the coordinator is the process with the largest process ID. The idea can be extended to elect best coordinator. So for example, election of a coordinator with the least computational load. Okay, who will be the coordinator? So there are some criteria to choose the coordinator. So one of that is the least computational load. That particular process will be elected as a coordinator. So if the computational load of a process Pi denoted by load I, then coordinator is the process with highest 1 by load I. So ties are broken by sorting the process ID. So this is what is taken care in case of election process. So there are two kinds of algorithms. One is Bully algorithm, second one is ring algorithm. So we'll see one by one. So in case of Bully algorithm, have you aware of this kind of algorithm? Okay. A process initiates election algorithm when it notices that the existing coordinator is not responding. So in this particular scenario, a process initiates when it will initiate election algorithm because if a particular process is not responding, the existing coordinator, which is already been elected, that is not responding. So in that case, process initiates a election algorithm just like this. So the fourth process is initiating the election algorithm. So process PI calls an election as follows. So these are the steps which it actually follows. So PI sends an election message to all the processes with the higher process ID. So process for this is the process ID of process and it will send an election message to all other processes who have higher process ID than this particular process. So 5 and 6. So it will give the election message. It will send the election message to 5, 6, and 7. So what will happen in the next case? So when process Pj with the j greater than I receives the message, it responds to the takeover message. So in this particular case, 5 and 6 is having greater than the process ID 4. So it will send back the message to process 4 saying that takeover. So PJ no more contest in the election. So in this particular case, it will come to know that only 5 and 6, these two are sending the takeover message. So process PJ reinitiates another call for election. Okay, so step 1 and 2 will be continued. So since 4 initiated, but it is able to get a takeover message from 5 and 6. So 5 will again initiate, which is greater than P4, that is process 4, that is process ID 4. It will be able to reinitiate the election process by sending the election message to the processes with the higher process ID than this 5, so which is 7 and 6. Again, the takeover message will be got from this 6 only. 7 it is not replied because it has crashed. So when 6 is taking over, again it will initiate the election. So only 7 is higher than 6. So in that case, it's not responding. That means 6 is the new coordinator now. So here in this particular case, when the election message has been sent from process ID 5, that process, it will be able to get the election, that is takeover message for 6. Okay, and then it will be able to get the 6 process ID, process with the process ID 6 will initiate the election again, and then if it is not getting any takeover message from any one of the processes which are having higher process ID than that particular process, it is understood that it has become the coordinator. So if no one process responds, then PI wins the election. PI sends the coordinator message to all other remaining processes. This is how it is bullying the remaining processes with the higher, lower process ID, and then taking over and getting the coordinator status. So that is why it is called as bully algorithm, where strongest wins. That means in this particular case, whoever is having the highest process ID will win the game. So this is where the bully algorithm works, and the coordinator is elected. Is it clear? Simple? Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So this is how it has been taken care. So you can show it in various steps. What happens when a particular coordinator is not responding, and how a new coordinator has been elected. Okay. The second one, that is ring algorithm, where this algorithm is generally used in a ring topology. When a process PI detects that the coordinator has crashed, it initiates an election algorithm. Even here also, similar to the bully algorithm, here the way of uh, electing the coordinator is based on the token, okay, or it is inserting the process ID of all the remaining active processes into a message and sending it to the next process, so that it will be, if it is not able to include its process ID into the message, it shows that that particular process has crashed or it is not responding. So what has to be done for the remaining processes? Who will be the coordinator? So here in this particular case, it is arranged in the form of a ring. So here again, we'll suppose consider that the process 7, okay, with process ID 7, it is not responding, which was acting as the coordinator earlier. So PI builds an election message E and sends it to its next node. It inserts its ID into the election message. So what happens is PI builds an election message, and it inserts its ID, and it will send it to the next node. So here PI, that is 5, it has initiated the election message, and it has inserted its process ID in the message and sent to the next process. Okay, so when PJ receives this particular message, it appends its ID and forward that particular message. So it has received, that is sixth process has received that particular message, which has been sent from 5. So what it does is it will insert its process ID into the message, and it will forward to the next. Okay. So if the next node has crashed, in this particular case, 7th has crashed. So PJ, that is here in this particular case is 6. P6, it finds the next alive node. So next alive node in the ring is 0. So it will be able to include uh, this ID, that is 0th ID in the message, and it will forward. So like that it will continue. So you will be able to see here next 5601, then it has reached to 2. It will insert again 56012, then it will come to 3. So it will insert its process ID. Next it will insert 4, and now the uh, message is back to 5. This process has actually initiated the election, and it is able to receive all those process IDs who are active, right? So once it is receiving this particular message with all the alive processes, what happens is it elects the process with the highest ID as coordinator. So in this particular case, 6 is the process ID which is having highest in number. So it will be electing that particular process as the coordinator. So now 6 becomes the coordinator. So it changes the message type to the coordination message and circulates it in the ring, because the other processes should be able to know who is the new coordinator. So what it will do is it will send a message coordination with its ID to all other remaining processes in the system. So C means it is actually the coordination message. E is the election message. C is the coordination message. With its ID, it is sending it to all other remaining processes. So it will be circulated again between all the processes like this, and this will be able to get the coordinator for the system. So this is how the election has been taken care, and the process which has been crashed, it will not be involved in this kind of thing, since it was passive, and then either it has crashed or some problem is there. So other processes will be able to elect a new coordinator. So the general comparison for Boolean and ring algorithm with respect to number of messages for electing a coordinator and respective problems are being compiled like this. So for the ring algorithm, number of messages for electing a coordinator is 2 into n. So in this particular case, an overlay ring topology is necessary. So without which it is not possible. Okay, so in this particular case, you will be able to get token based, which you have seen earlier. For mutual exclusion can be taken up, and then you can use this election algorithm, okay, to get the coordinator. So these are the few points under the election algorithm, why and how those things are important to elect a coordinator, to get a mutual exclusion done, and coordination and agreement is done in case of distributed systems. Election algorithms are used for choosing a unique process that will coordinate an activity. At the end of the election algorithm, all nodes should uniquely identify the coordinator. So this is being taken care in case of Boolean algorithm, also in case of ring algorithm also, just to identify which will be the new coordinator, and it will be informed to all other nodes which are interacting with one another in the system. So two algorithms which you have already seen: Boolean algorithm, process communicate in a distributed manner to elect a coordinator in case of Boolean algorithm. In case of ring algorithm, so processes in a ring topology circulate election messages to choose a coordinator. So these are the two concepts. In case of Boolean algorithm, it is in the form of a distributed manner, and in case of ring algorithm, it is circulated as in case of token based, or the message has been circulated in the form of a ring, and then the coordinator has been elected. So basically, these are the things which we have to learn under the mutual exclusion as well as in case of election algorithm. If you have any doubts, you can ask. Yes. Any doubts? Yes. Can anyone summarize whatever we have done in today's class? Can anyone answer why mutual exclusion is difficult in case of distributed systems? And why it is required? Yeah. Students, you better respond. Shall I call your names one after the other, or you are ready to give the answer, either in the form of a message in the chat box, or you unmute yourself and then give the answer?
Ma'am, in distributed systems, there can be a large number of nodes, so there can be large number of processes trying to request same resource. So that is why mutual exclusion is difficult.
But it has to be implemented, right? You need to have the mutual exclusion implemented in distributed this one. But why it is difficult, I am asking. Multiple processes will be there. Even in the uniprocessor systems, you will be having multiple processes, right? If you have seen the performance of your system, you will be able to see that some of the system processes working in the background, some of the application processes will be working on the foreground, right? Some are interactive, some are non-interactive, some are batch processes. So many different types of processes you have seen, and then the interaction also you have seen in case of uniprocessor systems also, right? But then why in distributed systems it is difficult? You have seen in uniprocessor systems, mutual exclusion is happening, and you can have shared memory concept also. Multiple processes you can take up the shared memory segment, and then the reading and writing can be controlled to maintain the consistency, right? You have not worked on semaphores and counting semaphores or simple semaphores, that is binary semaphores. You must have seen in operating system in maybe fourth semester or fifth semester, I'm not very sure, where you have worked upon readers writers problem, producer consumer problem, and how it can be solved using semaphore. Yes.
Yes, ma'am, we have.
Yeah. So what is a semaphore, and how it is implemented in case of operating system, in case of uniprocessor systems? Same concept you are going to extend it for the distributed, because you have multiple systems here, not a single uniprocessor system. What is a semaphore? Nihal, Tanya, you people use message passing mechanism extensively among yourself, right, as peer processes. But when a coordinator is asking or a teacher is asking, you are not giving any reply. Why? I can understand it is a decentralized system. But whenever a request is been put up, you will have to at least give the answer, right? Either reply okay or access denied. If no reply is there, no interaction is there, I will have to assume that that processor has crashed or it is not active. Is it fine? Same human behavior has been imparted on distributed systems, and humans only has developed many algorithms based on the human behavior, which can be acted upon the computers to interact and send and receive. But in reality, in distributed systems class only, I'm not able to get that response. Why? Please make it a point that you give an attempt. If you are not interacting, every time if you show that you are joined to the class, but no interaction is there, I will consider your local status as passive. If I have to collect the global state of each one of you and take a snapshot, so in that case, I will have to decide which are the processes which are active and which are the processes which are inactive, just by based on the message which you have passed in the message box, or you have interacted orally. Yes, students. So the concepts for today's class, whether they are clear and there are no more doubts.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. Then we'll end up the class. I hope all of you seen the topics for your quiz too, right?